Okay, so we're going to talk about our approach in education. So, do you understand the word curriculum?
Curriculum, how to spell?
C-U-R-R. Do you know how to say curriculum?
课程. Oh, yeah.
There we go. So, there is actually a curriculum that we have to teach the children, even in the bunnies. And the curriculum and the way that we teach the children, it's called the EYFS. So this presentation we're going to talk and discuss, well probably just talk, about the EYFS and our approach to education. So I think I explained before that in a primary school we'll have one teacher and lots of children, and all the children do the same thing and they listen. Now you've already had one day at the nursery, so you know that's not what we do. That's not at all what we do. So instead we have different activities at the same time, and probably you didn't notice it yet, but we tried to take the child's interests first and then come up with some activities according to the interests of the child. So we sort of see it as like a plan, and we'll have individual plans for all the children. So all the children, the teachers should know what a child is able to do and what a child is not yet able to do, but we hope we'll be able to do soon. So that's the way that we think about the children. It's very individual. It's one child, one child, one child. So far in the Chinese program, we have not asked you to do plans in the same way as the other teachers. Maybe in the future that will change, but at the moment, it's the English and French teachers who have to do the planning, and they have to write written observations. Hopefully soon we will ask you to start some observations on the children, but at the beginning we're still learning the best ways to look after the children, so you don't have to do observations yet. But I think it's very helpful for you to understand how we plan, because the way of thinking for the EYFS is actually very helpful. And I think even if you don't do the written observations, if you learn the principles and the way of thinking, the way of organizing, I think it will really help you. I think the EYFS is a great document. So different children will have different needs, because they're not all the same age, they're not all the same personality, and some are going to be quiet and shy, and some are going to be physical, some will talk more, some will have great imaginations, others will like to follow things calmly. So the first thing is we have to know the children. If you really want to teach the children Mandarin, you will respond differently to each child, because they're different. So I sometimes give an example with water. Do you understand warm water?
Warm water.
So if I wanted warm water, not boiling, not cold, how to get there depends on what I have to start. So if I have a cup of tea that's boiling and I want only warm water, I have to put something cold. But if I have cold water from the fridge and I want warm water, I have to put something hot. So the aim is all, in this example, was warm water. But what I do depends on the need of the water I already have. So it's a little bit the same with children. If we don't want all the children to be the same, but we want to be able to teach them. And so instead of warm, it's teaching. We want them to learn and grow. So some children will need something, and another child will need the opposite. And so the first thing is that we must know the children. And you get that by observing, by looking and noticing. So that's the first thing. And then we see the time in the nursery as learning and growth and progression. So in one day, maybe you don't notice it, although maybe you do. You said your little boy repeated a word. But actually, we must also think of 1 year, for example, in the nursery. So what we want to do is to really help the children to know more at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year. And children learn in stages. We're going to look at that soon in this presentation. So there are different stages to learning. So a child might learn to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And maybe at the beginning it's just a sound that and then maybe they understand it on the fingers, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But maybe that doesn't have so much meaning. Later, maybe the child will understand that 3 is 3 different things, which is not the same as just 1, 2, 3. This seems like a pattern. Children are very good at learning patterns. Then the next step is for the child to understand that this pattern has meaning. It's actually, we can use it. And then later, the child will understand that 5, for example, is more things than 3. So the concept of 5 being many things and 3 or 1 being not many things, the child will understand that. So this is actually the beginning of mathematics, of course. So everything we do is one step in that learning journey. Does that make sense? Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So what we've just started talking about is the idea of a unique child. So every child is unique.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And that is the first of the principles. So we're going to just look at this handout. So we have four principles. So here we see it's the early year foundation stage principles. So that's the title. And we're just looking at the first one, a unique child. There are 4 different principles, and if we look at just the headings, we've got the unique child, which we've talked about a little bit. We're going to continue to talk about that. Afterwards, we will talk about positive relationships. Afterwards, we will talk about enabling environments. So the first 3 are things that we can do, in a way. And then, so if we have a unique child, and we have a positive relationship, and we create an enabling environment, then we have learning and development. So it's a little bit like maths. Unique child plus positive relationship plus enabling environment equals learning and development. Does that make sense? So we've been talking a little bit about the unique child, so we can read it maybe together.
Yeah.
So the first one is child development. So there is child development. We've talked about the children will learn. And then we want them to be skillful communicators. So you were saying sometimes that if a child is crying, you can feel anxious.
Yeah.
But actually that's the first step of being a communicator. And actually communication is something we take very seriously because we're teaching them 3 languages. So we really recognize the importance of communication. And then also a competent learner. So that really means that we believe that children can learn. So then another responsibility we have in this principle of unique child is inclusive practice.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? That the first one is equality and diversity.
Yeah.
And I think you do an online training. Is that right? Did you do an online training, Juan?
Yeah, we did about equality and diversity.
So this is something that is really important. It comes up in British values, and it's part of our. It's firstly the law requires it, but also it's really important to us as the values in our nursery. We really believe in this. So simply, everyone is equal. So it doesn't matter if you're black or white or Chinese, or French, or South American, or if you're Jewish, or if your parents are Muslim, or if you live in a family with only one mother but no father lives with you, or if you have two mothers, or two fathers, or divorced parents, or if you are disabled, so maybe a child can't walk and will never be able to walk, or maybe if the parents have a problem, a physical problem or a mental development problem. It doesn't matter who you are, everyone is different. And actually, there is probably no such thing as normal. Everyone is different in some ways. Some children are different in many big ways, and some parents are different, and the teachers are different. Everyone is different, and everyone is important. Everyone is human. So the first thing is we want to respect everyone, and it's so important. We will send you, you will do an online training on this. So that is equality and diversity. Okay, great. Then we have children's entitlements. So children have the right to learn. They have human rights as well. Just because a child is young does not mean that they do not have the right for a certain amount of freedom to express their emotions, to express their preferences, what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can think of children as maybe in a busy family. We don't have time to think that the child has preferences because we have to do something different. But actually, the United Nations declared human rights for everyone, which includes children. And then we also have the Child Act in the UK, which gives children rights and protections as well. And then early support. So this is very interesting, that if a child does have a problem with development, we would often call it a special educational need.
Yeah.
If a child has a special educational need, the younger we start helping the child, the better the child will do. If we make no special support and we wait until the child is 10, it can be very late. So maybe a child with some help will be able to learn later to read. For example, if a child has autism, autistic children actually are very good, often, at reading. But if the emotional problems that come with autism are not given any support, then maybe the child will always be pushed on the side of the classroom, and then later will not really be able to learn to read because the child is not allowed in the classroom, for example. Instead, if we offer a lot of support so that the child can, with support, learn to understand his or her emotions and the emotions of other children, then the child will be able to be integrated in the classroom and will be able to learn to read like the other children. So it's really important that we provide early support. Okay, so that's inclusive practice. And the next one is 1.3, keeping safe. So of course we want the children to be safe and protected, obviously. So one of the umbrellas of responsibility that we had on, can I use this one? So one of the umbrellas, the third one is health and safety. So that's really what we're talking about here. It's keeping the children safe and protected. That's one of our responsibilities. And then for a child then, the next one is discovering boundaries. So with boundaries, it's understanding when they must stop. For example, on the road, they can walk on the pavement, but they must not go where the cars are. So that's an example of a boundary. Another boundary might be it's okay to start to walk on the stairs when they're very young, but maybe they have to hold on to something. Or if it's a slide, then maybe an older child learns that they can use the slide, but they mustn't go off the sides. That's another physical boundary. We don't use fire in the nursery, but if there was a fire, the child must learn the boundary that they can get close, to a certain distance where it's warm, but not too close where it's dangerous. So that's another boundary. But boundaries can also be about actions. So we don't throw things inside the nursery, but maybe it's okay to throw a ball outside. So there's a boundary as to where you are and how you behave. Another boundary, which some children will really struggle with, is you're not allowed to bite other children, for example, and you're not allowed to scratch other children. So if a child is frustrated and they haven't learnt to share yet, or to take turns, which is at this age when a child shares, really they take turns. If they haven't learned how to take turns, they might be frustrated and scratch or push or pull, and that's a boundary. We have golden rules, which we will talk about at some point, but the nursery has golden rules, and that is a set of boundaries. So we are gentle, which is a positive version, and the boundary is we don't scratch, we don't push. So later, hopefully, we will have time, probably not today, but we will talk about our positive behaviour policy. And because we're talking about boundaries, it's a really good time to mention the positive behaviour policy. It is very tempting to always say no. So stop or no. But actually, a child needs to learn what to do. And especially if a child is pushing another child or wants to bite another child, the reason is the child is frustrated. So saying no and stop does not help the child understand the frustration. It is not a useful tool for the child just to hear stop. So we have a positive behaviour policy where we try to encourage the behaviour that we want. So we understand the child's emotion and say, you're frustrated, you want to use this. We will take turns. So your friend can use it now, and then afterwards it will be your turn. So you have to wait and you can do something else, but then we will come back and it will be your turn. So then the child has energy. And if it stops, if the child has to stop all the time, it just gets more and more frustrating. But if we teach the child how to use the energy and do something else, it's more satisfying for the child and much more effective. And they learn about their emotion, and they learn, it's the first step, I suppose, in problem solving. I can't do this, but I can do that. So boundaries are very important to keep a child safe, physically safe. There's also something about an emotional boundary, and always we try to use the positive behaviour. So we, for example, if a child wants to run onto the road, of course we say stop, but then we also explain, stay on the pavement. Then the child knows what they can do, instead of just stop. So we try to provide the positive action, not just the boundary. Can you think of any boundaries that you saw on your first day?
Okay, yeah. Just I mentioned, keep their hands free when they upstairs. It's a boundary. When the children upstairs, and we
To
should
go outside or
inside
inside
or,
on the stairs?
or outside. We should keep their hands free.
Empty.
Empty. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Empty. Yeah.
Yes. So when they're going up the stairs, their hands should be empty,
Empty.
so they can hold on.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yes. And they eat their toys. You don't know ever. You shouldn't just say no, and you can teach them how to play the toys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Very good.
Choke. Yesterday I noticed that there is a little boy. He eats the choke. The choke. I think the choke is can't eat here, right? The choke. 这里的分别是不能吃的，是
So we can't eat the
can't
chocolate.
can't eat the
eat the
choke.
choke. So that's the chocolate is on the ground. They can take away, and the children don't know, so they were putting into their mouths. So when I saw this, I came to the boy and told him, don't eat this can't, and I gave him another thing to play, and I show him put the chocolate into the basket. I do this action maybe twice, and he copied it, just put into the basket, and then, but I found 2 times he eats the choke.
Yeah.
So maybe he will do this again, but I think this need time and need to be patient to teach, to tell him. And I found that there is an emotion boundary when the children cry, and I found that some teacher is good at to comfort them, to tell them you're fine, and I know what you want to do, and give them another advice to do. For example, there is a boy who wake up and he wants to his mom, so he go to the door, want to open the door and cry, and the other teacher come to him and comfort and say something to comfort and try to distract. So I think this is a good way.
Yeah. So there are 2 things there. The first one is the boundary. The boundary is the children cannot leave the classroom in the middle of the day. So that's the boundary. And then something that is not a boundary is what we do. So the emotional support and then the distraction. And then often we have pictures of the parents in the classroom. For the new children, that can be a big comfort to see the picture of their parents.
I saw there is a teacher gave him the picture.
Yeah. Young children really enjoy that. So that's not a boundary, but it's a very good technique. Great, I think you've understood the boundaries. And then the last one of keeping safe is making choices. So here it's really quite obvious. Children need to know how to make choices. And then also, there's an emotional side to that, to choose. But then also there is a practical about keeping safe, because in all our lives we will have choices for how we eat. Do we do physical exercise? Do we cross the road without looking? Do we spend time with people who are dangerous? Do we, as adults, do we drink too much? We have choices from when you're very young until you're very old, and part of keeping safe is knowing how to make the right choice to keep yourself safe. So here, making choices is a big thing, but in this example, it's about keeping safe. And to be able to keep ourselves safe, we need to learn how to make choices. Because if we never choose anything, then we won't be able to be safe in the future.
我就是想表达这个，对。
What was that?
I asked her whether she has something to add. Whether I translated all the meaning. She added that the safety is the priority to making choice.
Absolutely.
To make choice. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the final one is health and well-being. So we want the children to grow and develop. So we gave examples, and we will look at this soon, about how children learn and develop. So at the beginning they can't do very much, and they learn to do more and more in many different areas. And so this is physical growth and also just mental growth and capability. And then we're aware that some children will have special educational needs. We talked about that already, but that comes also under health and well-being. So if a child has a disability, or if they have an allergy, that's a good example. If they have an allergy, we have to be careful, but they also have to learn when they're old enough so that they can protect themselves. They have to understand their own allergies so that they can keep safe. So the next one is physical well-being. So that's quite obvious. We have to eat well, we have to exercise and move, and we really that's it. We have to look after our body. So I guess we have to brush our teeth, we have to wash our hands. All of that is physical well-being. And then we talked about in the umbrellas of responsibilities, this one. The first one is safeguarding, and one of the areas of abuse is physical abuse. So here again, the safeguarding, just with health and well-being, we have a responsibility to check that there is not physical abuse. There are lots of other types of abuse as well, but it is just relevant to this point. And then the final one is emotional well-being. So a child must learn to understand his and her own emotions. Also other children's, but here we're talking about the unique child, so they have to understand their own emotions and learn to express them. And then also with safeguarding, we have a responsibility to check for emotional abuse. So that's the end of the unique child. So on this one we learned that each child is different. They can learn. It doesn't matter if they're different. We will support them. We want them to be safe. We want them to be healthy and to have good well-being. So that's the first thing. We respect a child. We see the child as being unique. You were at the nursery yesterday. So can you notice that the children were different?
Yeah.
Do you want to just give an example?
For example, the first girl I met, I play with her. She's name is Alice. She is very quiet, shy. But after half day, I noticed that she is good at observe. She is quiet. She is quiet, but she sit in a place to observe what's happened, and sometimes she will smell. She will smell. For example, if some children are happy, and she can feel happy. She just don't want to say too much. She just want to observe. This is very interesting, and I can feel some similar with me. Me too. And another boy, Lucas, he is very energetic, and he likes speak, he likes smile, but also he likes quiet. He likes quiet. And there is one boy. When he saw some child is cry, he will come to and share the toy or share another something to play with them to make them happy. So I feel this boy is very good. It's so warmly, it's so friendly. So every children is different, is unique, and some children like music. When the teacher show them the music to play the music, to play guitar, and some children just sit down and enjoy the music, but some children don't like. Some child don't like just play far away. So at first I want to ask her or she, ask he or she to come with us, but the other teacher said, just let him alone. Never mind.
Never mind.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. So that's the uni child.
Yes.
So now we're going to go on to positive relationships. So this is the second principle. Of the EYFS. So the first one is we have to respect each other. And here we have 3 points. We have to understand that other people have feelings. So this could be the children have to understand that each other have feelings. And we have to understand that the children have feelings. And I mentioned role modeling before. So of course we have to understand that the other teachers have feelings. And children learn a lot by observing, as you were just saying. And so we have to respect the other teachers and show be a good role model and help the children understand their own emotions and that the other children have emotions as well. That's the first one. Second one is friendships. Friendship is a key part of life for most people. And it is not always easy. So we have to learn how to be friends. That maybe we want to be friends with someone, but the children don't want to take it in turns. But if we want to have friends, we have to take it in turns and enjoy, play together. And then here, I've mentioned it already, but the professional relationship. So they see us as the role models. So that's respecting each other. We have to create. So the environment, the positive relationship here is part of human growth as well. So it's a little bit, Unique Child is about us, and positive relationship is about community really, and about playing and being with other people. And at this age we have to teach it, and the children have to learn. Next one is parents as partners. So the parents of the children are very important to us in the nursery as well. So the first one is that we must respect diversity. So we talked about equal opportunities earlier, and you will do a training, and this includes also respect for diversity of the parents. So it doesn't matter what their religion is, what their sexuality is, what their lifestyle is, as long as there is no safeguarding problem, as long as there's no abuse, then many families live in different ways, and we have to respect all of them. So that's the first one. And there are other areas in diversity. So of course there is the race. It doesn't matter what nationality or race or language the family is. It doesn't matter if they're married or not married. We respect them if they're pregnant or if they're not pregnant. Of course there is health and safety that we must be careful of if a mother is pregnant, but we respect all the mothers and the fathers. And there are just many different areas. And basically, if you can think of something that a person can be different, we respect them anyway. So if a man has some piercings or tattoos or a funny haircut or a different colour haircut, or they dress in a different way, they're still the parents of our children, and we must teach the children that we respect everyone. So we have to show it. Maybe inside we're surprised, but we must show respect because it's an important human value, and we want to teach the children because we're role models.
Yeah, I think it's very important for our Chinese teacher because we are from the kind of
Conservative.
Yeah.
And then maybe some of our parents have special educational needs. Maybe a parent could be autistic or have some other disability or special need. But probably some of the most clever geniuses in the world probably had very bad social skills. Some of the best mathematicians maybe were not very good at eye contact or friendship. Maybe they were a little bit rude to people, but they were maybe a brilliant person. So even if we find a parent surprising in their behaviour, they're still a human being. They still have feelings and they still have abilities.
Yeah.
So maybe we can't see the strengths and we only see something that is surprising, but we respect them and we always treat them with respect, and we're patient and we're calm and we show them respect. The next point is communication. So we're talking about parents as partners. We often call this whole section partnership with parents, and communication is an amazing key. Because
Sorry, could you please? We also called it what? Sorry.
all of this is partnership with parents.
Thank you.
The whole of 2.2
Uh-huh.
is partnership with parents as well. So we have communication. So communication goes both ways. The first thing you will notice is that parents want information. They're curious. What has my child done today?
Yeah.
What are they able to do? Are they happy? So maybe a child, especially a new child, will cry in the morning when their parent leaves. So it's important for us to communicate with the parents that the child has not cried all day. Because if they see the child cry in the morning, and often at the end of the day when they're collected for a new child, that can be very emotional when they see their parent again and they're happy, but somehow they cry because it's emotional. They realise they've been without their parent, they realise they missed their parent. So maybe the parent sees the child cry in the morning and cry in the afternoon, and so they imagine the child has cried all day. So we have to communicate and tell them what their child has done. You will see a little training video later, maybe on Monday, with Pauline, which talks about communication with parents. So that's the first thing, is the parents want to know what their child, and not just about the emotional state, but what activities have they done? Did they eat their lunch? Did they enjoy themselves? So communication is very important. We have, for the younger children, we fill in a form and we say how much the children have eaten, and maybe you will be asked to help fill in those and ask a teacher to explain. Sometimes we put a percentage, say 50% of the pasta, for example, or some nurseries or some rooms put a little, medium or a lot. So there are different ways that each nursery or each room communicates. So just, you will find out, someone will show you. But we know, and so that's about food, about if they've slept. Another important thing, which is both health and safety and communication, is if a child has an accident. So we fill in an accident form and we put a witness as well if a child has an accident, so we explain what happened. And an accident could be something big or small. A child falls over and hurts their knee, for example. Maybe they cry, but it's not, you don't think, oh, it's not a big thing, but actually we should tell the parent what happened. So all of that is communication. And then there's communication in the opposite direction that we receive. And that is useful information. We talked about the unique child, and children have different interests. So it's interesting to hear what they do at home. Did they go to the museum? Is a grandparent coming to visit? Is the mother just had a little child? Did the mother give birth to a baby? Is a grandparent staying with them? So changes at home might change the behaviour of a child. So if we know what is happening at home, we can understand the emotion of the child. I think this is maybe a good example. So imagine as an adult that someone stole your mobile phone. How would you feel? How would you feel if someone stole your mobile phone?
Sad.
Angry for me. It happened to me actually.
And you were angry?
I was so angry.
It happened to me and I was really angry. Someone took my phone from me in the street for no reason. I was really angry and frustrated. And I'll be honest, I cried a little bit. Because I was so frustrated. I didn't have a map. I couldn't phone my friend to say I was going to be late. I had to do many things and I couldn't do any of them. It was very frustrating. And I felt a little bit overwhelmed on the emotion. I felt trapped and powerless. And I hate those feelings. It's a horrible feeling. And then it took a while before I could get a new phone and a new SIM card, and I didn't have time, and I had to go to work, and I had to do all these things, and I was probably a little bit more impatient during the day in the work meeting, because I didn't have my phone and I knew I had to do it and it made everything complicated.
Yeah.
It was very frustrating. But I'm an adult and I have many life skills and I have the ability to buy a new phone. I have the ability and power to buy a new phone. I have the choice to cancel my evening plans and go to the shop. A child does not have the power to buy a new toy. A child does not have the ability or the money to buy a new toy. The child does not have the power to say, let's cancel dinner. I want to find a new toy. So something that might seem very small, I'm really talking about the emotional development of a child, but something that might seem very small, for example, a child lost his favourite toy, or the father or mother lost their favourite bunny in the car on the weekend, can be a big emotional event for a child. And the children do not have life skills like we have. So the information that a parent tells us, oh, we lost his favourite bunny, or we lost her favourite teddy bear this weekend or this morning, is really, really important information. Because you felt angry. For a child, it is so much more complicated because they are also confused and they are powerless. And that child will probably not sleep well at nap time. And so we need to have extra compassion for the child and understand that for them this is a traumatic event. Probably much more traumatic than if you had your mobile phone stolen. So with that understanding, we can realize why the communication from the parents is so important. And then so other things like moving house can be a major event for a child. You've moved to England recently. Was everything about moving to England fun, or was it stressful, or was there any anxiety for you?
For me, it's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah, but when I was a child, if I go to stay to my relatives' home 1 month or 1 week, that is a big disaster.
Yeah. And so we have many international families, so they could be moving houses from a different country, or even within London, they can move from one flat to another flat. So that's something quite big in a child's life. Even changing bedrooms can be quite a big event, or changing classrooms as they get older. All of these things can be stressful or confusing. So that's why the communication is so important. It can also be positive. So maybe the parent can say, this girl has started playing with cars, or this boy is interested in dinosaurs. So that could also be useful information that I'll talk about soon. But all of that, we must just listen to the parents. 谢谢.
谢谢.
And the next one is learning together. So here it's really about communication, that if we hear what is effective at home, maybe we can use the same technique. So if we hear that a child cries at home and the mother sings this particular song and it helps, then maybe the English teachers can say, or whichever language the song is, maybe we can use the same song at the nursery. Or if they say, oh, at mealtime I do this and that helps my child, then maybe we can copy something from home. And the other way, because often the children are much better at trying, for example, new food at the nursery, so we can share that information with the parents to help them. Or if we find a good effective technique, such as singing a song, I've already used as an example, but maybe there's an activity that a child is really enjoying that we're using, then we can tell the parents and they can do the same activity at home. So we want to work together, and then it is especially important if a child has special educational needs or has challenging behaviour. We don't talk about good and bad behaviour. That is a judgment. Instead, we talk about challenging behavior because we find it challenging. So we own the emotion, we own the reaction, saying that's my reaction. For the child, maybe it's very satisfying to hit other children. The child is frustrated and they hit the other child, maybe that child thinks it's satisfying. So they don't think it's bad behavior, but we find it challenging and we want to teach other values. So we will use our positive behavior policy to try to give the child something better to do. So if we find something that is effective, we try to tell the parents what we have done that works, so that they can try the same technique. So, for example, if a child is biting, we don't just say no, no, no. There is a positive behavior policy. Maybe the parents are just saying no, 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 and so the child gets more and more frustrated. So we try to, it's a little bit teaching the parents, but also just working together, so we use the same technique. So maybe a parent will say no, 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 okay, because the parent is frustrated and it's tiring to make the boundary. So if we explain the technique that we use, if they use the same technique, it's easier to help the child change their behavior.
是的。
Great. So probably at the beginning, you won't have, especially if you're new, you won't have a direct, much communication with the parents, I suppose. But just listen to what the other teachers say. So probably you will hear teachers say, oh, Oscar's mother told us ABC. So then you must listen to that because it has the information. Okay, so that's parents as partners or partnership with parents. Okay, so the next one is supporting learning. So here we have the positive interactions. So if we want the children to learn, they must have a good experience with you. If it's always frustrating, they will not learn anything. This could also include giving emotional support. So for example, with a younger child, you might need to hug them. I think maybe one of you had a question about if the child is too close. So if a child needs emotional support, you can hug a child, no problem. However, maybe you have a good relationship with a child and you like hugging, but the child is quite happy doing a book or doing an activity. In that situation, you must not hug the child, because in that example, you want the hug, not the child, and that is different. We're here for the children. So if they need emotional support, we can hug them. If they don't need emotional support, we don't hug them. And just positive interactions is also about many things we have already discussed. Respecting the child, understanding a child's preferences, protecting children. All of these things are many different ways that we can have a positive relationship. This whole principle, this whole section is positive relationships. So that really here it's saying, well, the interaction must be positive as well. So we talked about the positive behavior policy. That's much more enjoyable for a child than saying no, stop, no, stop, no, stop. So that also is part of this positive interaction.
Yeah, she said she talks about some of her own idea that always giving the child more options. As a kind of positive behavior behavior.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good example. Sometimes, for example, at lunchtime, a child does not want to sit down. So a good technique can be to say, do you want to sit next to me, or do you want to sit next to your friend? So sometimes if we give an A or B choice, it's much easier than you must sit down. That's a really good example, thank you. So the next one is listening to children. And so here we listen just in general. So what are they interested in? What do they enjoy? Because that is useful information for the next section, which is enabling environments. So we'll talk about that later, but the first thing is to get the information. So what do they like? What do they enjoy? What is happening in their life? So we must listen. And then also, listening to children is also part of safeguarding. We talked about the area of responsibility, the safeguarding policy. And one of the things that you will learn in your training is that we must listen. What are the children saying? Is it about their interests, or is there something worrying at home? Is there something surprising? So that's also part of our positive relationship. I forgot to say on the positive interactions on the previous section, I said it's okay to hug the children. Just a reminder of our two-person policy. This is not just for hugging, but in general we have a two-person policy wherever possible. So as much as possible, there'll be always two teachers together. And this is especially important if we're going to be hugging a child. Of course, if a child needs it, the child's needs come first, but it should always have two people. This protects the teacher's reputation as well as protecting the children. Great. And the final one is about effective teaching. So see, you might be doing an activity, any sort of activity or song or anything at all, and you see that it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, we have to adapt. So maybe we have an idea of doing one thing, but in the end we have to do something different because the children are not interested. And that is part of supporting learning. If they're not interested, they're not going to learn. So we can have one idea, but we have to listen to the children, observe the children, and just adapt as required. And then also notice, maybe you do a song that's too long, and you notice the other teachers do shorter songs, and that's better. So depending on the age group and depending on the children, their concentration might be short or longer. So to teach effectively, we must notice, does it work? And it's okay, don't be frustrated. Use it as useful information for yourself so that next time it's better. And maybe something that doesn't work today does work tomorrow, or something that works today doesn't work tomorrow. But just try to get as much information and notice, is it working or is it boring? Okay, so now the last section of key person of positive relationships is the key person. So key person is probably on the vocab lists.
Yeah, it is.
So children have at least one key person. Often they have two, one in English and one in French. Because at the moment the Chinese teachers have a shorter shift and we're still introducing the program, we haven't made you key people. Maybe the people watching this video, we've changed it, so I don't know, in the future that might change. But a key person, the reason we have more than one is that we're open 10 hours a day, and nobody, maybe except the managers, work 10 hours a day. The managers are not supposed to work 10 hours a day, but sometimes they do. And so the key person should be the person who knows the child best. They should know the child's interests, their age, their abilities, and that's the first thing. And then they must have a secure attachment. That's the first point. Secure attachment of a key person means that the child trusts the key person. So, of course we say hello to all the children, but there should be a little bit of a more intense, a deeper relationship between the key person and the key child. Each teacher will have many key children, and it is that responsibility of the key person to do written observations and planning and reports. And if there is a question about the child, the parent should ask the key person first. We do reports, we'll deal with that in this later section, but the reports, we have a meeting often with the parents to explain the report, and the key person should be there to explain. If we have an inspection, the inspectors will ask the key person the most questions about that child, and we have to know the child. And the secure attachment is only possible if we know our children. So even though you're not the key people at the moment, even though people watching the video, that might be different, you should still know the children, and that will help you. That will help you with everything, really. Was that you should probably also know this, but a key person should always know who is their oldest key child and who is their youngest key child. just to know where each child fits within the age group as well. The next point in the key person is shared care. So the key person cannot do everything. Because firstly, that they don't work 10 hours a day. Also, a child might be taking part in an activity with another teacher. And also the children live at home. They don't live at the nursery and they don't live with the key person. So the key person has the responsibility to understand that many people look after the child. And so the key person might ask you questions like, how did it go in the park? So you might think that that is the key person asking you to see how you are doing as a teacher. And that is one part. But they might also be asking you because they want to know about the children. And also, if they've got questions, understanding that the parents, we talked about the communication with parents, well, the key person has this responsibility. If they have questions, maybe the behavior of the child has changed or they're looking for ideas. So it's the key person's responsibility to ask the parents. So it's not just there is communication and we wait passively for it to happen. The key person will be active to take responsibility to understand this. And then the last one is independence. So we want to teach the children to be independent. We want to teach the children how to do things on their own.
Yeah.
And the key person has extra responsibilities for that. So obviously we have to support the children because they can't do everything, but the aim is to teach them so that they can do it. So this is the education side, not just the care side. We want them to learn to be able to do things. Good. So we did the unique child and positive relationships, and now we're going to do the enabling environments. So this is really about what we can do to prepare. The environment here is mostly about classroom, also outside as well when we go to the park or the playground. So there is a cycle which is observation, assessment and planning. So this is what the teachers do. So the first thing is we start with a child. So start with a child means a unique child. It means we have to know the child's interests, know their ability and the area of development. So that's starting with a child. And then we have assessment. So there are two different parts to this. So the first one is we assess what we've done, what we're doing right now. Is it working? Or is the child's interest gone somewhere else? We have to adapt. And then there's also, if the child does do the activity, how did the child do? Was the child engaged? Was the child concentrating? Did the child enjoy it? And then if they did it, how well did they do it? So if the activity is moving a cup from here to here, if you can see that on the video, if that's activity, did they manage or did they need support? And if they managed, we see it in three levels. So firstly, we call it emerging. So they're just trying to do it. They've understood and they're trying, but it's the very beginning. And then we have developing. So they're starting to learn how to do it. Maybe we need to help them, either physically or to show them so they understand. So developing with some support, they're doing it. And then there is secure. So they know what to do and they can do it on their own, independently, without help. So with the planning and assessment, we assess how well a child has managed to do it, and then we plan the next steps. So we think, next time we can do the same activity again, if it's emerging, because they haven't learnt it. But once a child has got to secure, the next steps will be a different activity. Or if we're teaching the child colours, once they've learnt one or two colours, we can introduce more colours. So it could be making the activity bigger, or it can be a different type of activity. So I'm going to give you an example here. So the key person, which is part of positive relationships, knows the child, which is unique child, and so knew that one little boy did not know how to count. he did not show any interest in counting. But she knew that for his age and for the other areas of development, he was much more advanced, and so mathematics, this boy was a little bit behind. So she planned an activity to introduce some counting. So she did a counting activity by counting the fingers, but he was not interested in counting fingers. The next time, she decided to count some, he was doing a building block activity, and so she counted the building blocks, but he was not interested in counting building blocks. So this type of planning and assessment occurred a few times, and she noticed that he was still not learning to count. And then she remembered he was very interested in vacuum cleaners. Do you know what a vacuum cleaner is?
吸尘器.
Oh.
It's not unusual. They make lots of noise, which boys sometimes like. Girls sometimes like it also. It involves movement. Children are often interested in vacuum cleaners. So the key person, knowing the unique child's interests, knew that he was interested in vacuum cleaners. So she got a catalogue to buy vacuum cleaners. And he loved the catalogue. He was very interested in this catalogue. So she planned an activity where he could do a cutting exercise. And he cut around the vacuum cleaners as well as he could for his age. And then there was a pile of vacuum cleaners cut out on the table. And she took 3 and she gave him the rest, which was maybe 10 or 20. So she had a few and he had many. And she said, I have more vacuum cleaners than you. And he understood the word more and he was like, no, I have more. He was very interested in his big pile and she had very few. She said, no, I have more. I have 1, 2, 3. He wanted to count. He wanted to show that he had more.
Yeah.
And that was how she got him interested in counting. So she took his activity and then used it to plan. She knew his interests. She knew his interests and then she planned an activity with it. So the assessment that showed he doesn't know how to count, he's not interested in counting construction blocks, counting fingers is not interesting. She used that information and planned using his interests, and then she was successful at learning to count with him. So the assessment is for the activity, but then also the key people will do these reports, and so we do reports every term so that we can see the progress of the child, and then we can compare with the standard, if you want, for a child of that age. Now every child is different, so there are different areas of learning. For example, there is physical development, there's also communication and language. In total, we consider 7 areas of learning. So it could be that no child progresses equally in 7 areas. No. Maybe they'll be better at physical development, but not so good at communication and language. And another child will be the opposite. They're very interested in mathematics, but not so much in physical development. So that there are always going to be differences. However, we want to see if a child is behind and not progressing. Maybe it could be, we call it PSED. Don't worry, we'll explain that later. But it's personal, social, and emotional development. So maybe one child is behind on that, and so we need to provide more support. And the best way is to do this, that we do the report and the tracking, and we see, are there any problems, are there any areas we need to give more support to, or is there more or less normal kind of standard development? So that is also part of assessment. And so if you notice something, often there will be a room meeting. I hope there's a room meeting in each classroom. There's supposed to be a room meeting in each classroom. I know sometimes it's difficult to find time. But if you notice something that you think one child is different, then please share that information. And the key person, maybe she saw something and if you saw something. So this could be about a safeguarding concern that we talked about, but it could also be about just normal child development. Saying, oh, I've noticed this child is very interested in this. or a child is not confident to do this, or a child finds this very difficult. So all of that is part of assessment. So information you have, please share it. So the next point is supporting every child. So we know from the unique child that every child has different personality and every child has different needs. And we talked about, in a unique child, we talked about equality and diversity. So we know that some children will have special educational needs. So this means that we're supporting every child. This enabling environment is, what can we do to help these children? So with the knowledge of that all the children are different, what can we do for that? So it could be, a child's needs could be different just from one day to the next day. So maybe a child is tired today and so needs different type of activity and support than tomorrow when the child is not tired. It could also be that at different times of day, when a child is hungry, maybe their needs are a bit different to when they're not hungry. Maybe at the end of the day they're tired, or maybe at the beginning of the day they're sleepy, or maybe a child has lots of energy and needs to move, or maybe a child is upset. So there could be all sorts of different needs, and we want to support every child with every different emotional need or physical need or interest. Maybe a child is bored, or maybe a child is better in smaller groups, less confident. Maybe when a child starts coming to the nursery, they need a lot of hugs and support and patience. And maybe another child needs to be more independent and to do things on their own. And maybe a child has a disability or, as I said, special educational needs. So every child will have a different need, and we have to know the children and help them with their need. Okay, and then we've got the learning journey. So the children progress, basically, and we want to see, I've talked about it a little bit in the previous section, but we want to see the children progress and learn more. So in the previous section we observe, we assess, we plan. And so here we also check that the children are progressing. And then the working together is, of course, we've got the key people, but we also work as a team. And also we might have to work with people from outside. So of course we work with parents as partners, but maybe a child does have special educational needs and we need a specialist. So we also work together with specialists. So the way to support a child is to know the child, to check that the child is progressing, and then if we need more support, then we can get support from our colleagues and we can get support from specialists. The next section is the learning environment. So the learning environment is, how is it to be a child in our nursery? So sometimes, I gave you the example of the mobile phone. It's important that we think of what is the experience for children. We often have a routine, we have a rota, we have activities. There are also things, responsibilities that we have, and just things that we have to do. How is it for the child? What is the emotional experience for the child? So, for example, if we're going to the playground and if it's winter and cold, does it take a long time to prepare the children with their coats? Are there some children who are waiting a long time? What is the impact on the child's emotion? Is that frustrating for the child? Should we maybe sing a song for the children who are ready so that they're not so frustrated whilst they're waiting? How about at lunchtime? Does it take a long time for things to be organised? Are we saying no all the time to the children? What is the emotional experience for the child for that? Do we have enough resources, or do the children often have to take turns, and is that frustrating? is it too loud? That can have an impact on the child's emotions. Is there too much change? Is it difficult for a child to feel stable and secure? What is the way that we organise the day? What is the impact on the child? And are we providing quiet times and quiet activities as well as physical and more energetic activities? There's something called a transition. Transition is an important concept. So transition can be any change. Really, transition means change. It can be any change. So the change of arriving in the morning. Before they were at home, then they were between home and nursery, and now they're at nursery. That's 3 changes. And now the parent has left. That's a 4th change. And that's for a child who's been coming every day. That's still 4 transitions, little ones. But for a new child who arrives for the first time, that's a really big change. Before, they never came to nursery, and they were always with their parents, and now they're at nursery and they're not with their parents. That's a really big transition. So there are big transitions and little transitions. And a child might need more support during the transition than when there's not a change. So for example, finishing lunch and going to sleep is a transition, that's a change. And a child might need more emotional support during those changes than if they're busy in an activity. So do you know what a dummy is? Dummy, do you know what a dummy is?
奶嘴. Yes.
So for a new child, when they're sleeping, we might allow it because it's a change. So we might allow them to have a dummy because it supports their emotion. However, if there's not a transition, we don't use dummies, because if they've got a dummy, then they're not talking, and there is a stage before talking called babbling, which is just making noises. And it's really important to use the muscles and the vocal cords to learn how to pronounce any words. We need to have strong vocal cords and control over our muscles. So if we have a dummy, we're not using the right muscles and we're not learning to control our voice. And so we will never learn to say a word. So during an activity during the day, we don't use dummies. But during a transition, especially towards sleep, it's okay to use a dummy for short periods of time. We try to reduce it, but sometimes new children need the emotional support. It might be different. It's possible that in different nurseries or different rooms they have a no dummy policy, but I'm just using that as an example. What are the other big transitions? There's a transition between the weekend and a Monday. Also, we close for 2 weeks in December and we close for 2 weeks in August. So after a long holiday, even a child who's been with us for 1 or 2 years, it's a big transition to be with the parents for 24 hours a day, 14 days, and then back at nursery. So maybe a child was very confident before the holidays, but after the holidays, it's a different emotional experience. So we must be aware of the changes in a child's life, the changes in the day, the individual, unique child, all of these things, and provide the environmental, we set up the organisation that allows us to provide emotional support to the child. Great. And then we have the outdoor and the indoor environment. So this is much more practical. So we will talk later about the 7 areas of learning. There's all these different areas, and we want to make sure that they're able to do the 7 areas of learning inside and outside. So we do have we'll do that later. There are 7 areas, so we want to make sure that the 7 areas are possible inside and outside. We want to make sure that the resources are available and safe, and that we include children's interests. And when we go outside, it's the same. We want the children to be able to learn in the different areas. In different cultures, in France, for example, when the children go outside, they just run and they just play. But in the UK, we are expected to make sure that they learn outside as well. So maybe we can count something. Like if you go to the park, we could count the red cars, for example. So we do mathematics and colours, for example. Or we could discover the world. So we look at nature, we look at the plants. Those are some examples. And then, yeah, that's it really. Just we make sure that inside and outside it's planned and ready for the children. Okay, and then the last one is the wider context. So we talked about transitions already, actually. I think we've spoken about this already. So transitions and continuity. So knowing that some things stay the same and some things change. And it could be a change from home and now starting nursery. Maybe the child was at a different nursery. Afterwards they'll go to school. These are the big transitions. We already talked about multi-agency working in a little bit. We can sometimes get experts to help us, especially if a child has special educational needs. It could be that we need to work with different specialists. So maybe there's a speech and language therapist who comes to help, but maybe there's also a physiotherapist that helps with something else. So we have to be open to want to work with many different specialists to make sure that all the needs of the child are met. And the final one is the community. So a child does not exist independently. A child probably has a family or a parent at a minimum, but then also lives and has neighbours, lives somewhere and has neighbours. Also is part of the school community, the nursery community. Maybe there could be different communities, so just so that we know that this is just really about awareness and working with the various people or groups as required. So if a child goes to, for example, a Chinese school on a Saturday morning, as a nursery we should communicate with that Saturday school to make sure that we're sharing information, especially about safeguarding, which is one of the areas, the umbrellas of responsibility. Safeguarding, if you don't remember, is on this one. So we want to be sharing that information, but also we can share reports that show the child's development. If the child goes to another nursery, we should share information with them. So just aware that a child doesn't exist in isolation, but is part of different groups, and we should be communicating with all of them, really. Great. So that's the end of the neighbouring environment. We're going to do one more section with that one because it's coming up to 1 o'clock. So now it's the final part of this one. If that can just be added on. So this is, we've done enabling. This is learning. So instead, we're not going to use, we've done the first three, and we said if we have a unique child, plus positive relationships, plus enabling environments, we get learning and development.
Yeah.
So now we're going to do learning and development, but we're not going to use this set of examples. Instead, we're going to use this. You can see that. You should have a copy of that. So I've got one for you here, and I've got one for you. So we've got two sections here. We've got the characteristics of effective learning, and then we have areas of learning and development. So the first one, characteristics of effective learning, is how children learn, and then the next one is what they learn. So the characteristics of effective learning are how they learn. So they learn by playing and exploring. They learn by active learning. And they learn by creating and thinking critically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with playing and exploring, really that's engagement. They're doing something. So they want to find out and explore. You'll notice this with children, they're so curious. They want to find out and they want to discover. So you'll see that all the time. And then they like to play with what they know. That's also great fun. If they know a toy, they know how it works, or they know how to use it. So they're engaged in, they're doing it. They're not exploring for the first time, but they're using something they know. And the third one is willing to have a go. So this is a little bit about confidence and a little bit about trying something for the first time. So all of these are what we'd call engagements, playing and exploring. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we've got active learning, which is really about motivation. So we've got being involved and concentrating. So the opposite is looking away, not being interested. If a child is concentrating and looking and wants to be involved, so tries to be part of the song or tries to do something, they're participating. So then they're being involved and they're concentrating. And that's one of the reasons we try not, this is a very good thing, we try not to interrupt a child. If a child is doing something, maybe we can help them, but we don't want to interrupt it because concentration is so special, it's how they learn. So we want to keep and make concentration longer and longer. Then there's also when they try something, maybe they don't manage. If they're trying to walk, maybe they fall over. Or maybe they have to, we gave the example of moving something, maybe it's too difficult. But normally children do not manage the first time. They have to do it many times, try many times. And so this is the second one, is having the motivation to keep trying. And it is something that we can really learn from children. Sometimes when we get older, if we don't manage the first time, we give up. But children don't. Often they just keep trying. And that's one of the ways they learn. And the third one is enjoying what they wanted to do. So if they wanted to do something and they manage, they enjoy it. And that is also part of learning. That it's two things. It's repetition, and there's also, we talked about the expectation, and then it being the same as the expectation on a previous talk last week, I think it was, where it's very satisfying. If you think, if I do this, this is going to happen, and if you manage, it's very satisfying. You get a little release of dopamine in the brain. If you think you want to do something and you manage, very satisfying. So here they have an intention, they want to do something, and they manage to do it, and they enjoy that very much. And with that, it's they learn. They learn how to do it, and they learn confidence, they learn cause and effect. So that's all active learning.
Yeah.
And then the third one is creating and thinking critically, which is really about thinking. So they have an idea, maybe we give them some Lego and they build a shape, so they have an idea of how they want to use it. It's not your idea, they decide how to use it. Also maybe they choose an activity. So there are choices of different activities and they go, I want to do this one instead of that one. So they're thinking. Maybe there's a problem they're trying to solve and they don't know how to do it, and they try different ways to do it. So that's all of that is about having their own idea and thinking. And the next stage is making links. So they realize that this is the same as that, or if this happens, that happens. So it could be that they understand that if they push a child, the other child cries.
Yeah.
They make a link, oh, I do this, that happens. Or it could be making a link that if they put water on their food, the food changes. So water and food, so that's fascinating for a child. We'll talk about schemas later, but transforming is very fascinating for a child, that things change or sometimes things don't change. And making the link is them thinking and understanding the world. They want to understand the world, and making links helps them understand. And then the last one is choosing ways to do things. So to get one result, there might be two different ways to do it. And if they choose which way to do it, that helps them understand as well. So that's thinking and choosing. So these are all the different ways that a child can learn. The characteristics means it's
The features.
features, exactly. It's the features of effective learning. So we've got playing and exploring, active learning, and creating and thinking critically. So this is almost like the quality, like the how, the quality of learning.
Yeah.
It's very much the how. And the next stage is the area of learning and development, and we have 7 areas, which is this, which is, I don't know if you can see, but it's this column here. Those are the 7 areas. So we have the 3 prime areas, which are the 3, they're all important, but these are the most important. So we call it PSED, personal, social and emotional development, physical development, and communication and language. Those are the first 3. And then we have literacy, mathematics, understanding the world, and expressive art and design. So these are the 7 areas that we learn. So just a warning, on this one, this is a slightly older document, and this has changed. The content of this is not the same anymore. So if you can, I don't know if you can see, but if you can cross out that section because it's wrong. It's the old version, and this is the new version. So you should know these 7 areas off by heart. And we will ask you, what are the 7 areas of learning? And they're the 7. So PSED, physical development, communication and language, literacy, mathematics, understanding the world, expressive arts and design. They're the 7 areas. And each area has different subcategories. Do you understand subcategories? Subcategories. So, categories. I don't know, I have to look it up in the dictionary.
The small one.
The small ones?
Yeah.
So each of the 7 areas, each big area has some little areas inside it.
Yeah, we got it.
So we've got the PSED,
Yeah.
and in that we have 3 areas. We've got making relationships, self-confidence and self-awareness, managing feelings and behavior. So in PSED we have these 3 areas. So what do you think making relationships is?
Relationships, the relationship between people and the relationship between the world, nature.
So here making relationships is about people.
People.
Only people. So it could be between the children and the other children to make friends, or between the children and the teachers. So those are the relationships that we look at.
Yeah.
And then we have self-confidence. So we talked about willing to have a go as a characteristic of effective learning, and you need some confidence to be willing to have a go. And that changes over time. And self-awareness is just being aware of what you're feeling and what your needs are. And then managing feelings and behavior. So if I feel like this, what can I do, or what do I do? We're going to talk quite a lot about this later. This is just the summary, and I'll give you lots of examples. And then the next one is physical development. So that is moving and handling. And in moving and handling, we sort of have, or in physical development in general, we have 2 ways of thinking about things. There's gross motor skills, which is making big movements. So standing, walking, running, using your arms. And then we have fine motor skills, which is our fingers and our detail. So children will need to learn how to hold a pen in the future. So at the beginning, we try to get them to do some exercises where they can use their hands to try to learn how to control their hands. The youngest children find that very difficult, and they can do very basic movements. And then as we get older, we can be very, very, very precise with our movements. So all of that comes under moving and handling. And it's also moving things, not just ourselves, but moving objects. And then health and self-care. So we're teaching children that we need to do exercise, that we must move, that we must eat healthily. Some things like chalk we can't eat, and other things we can eat, all of that. And then how to get dressed and how to go to the toilet. All of these things are part of health and self-care. And then we have communication and language. So we've got listening and understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, so it's listening and attention. It's changed. Listening and attention. So if you're, at the moment, you're both listening and being attentive. But if you're bored, you're not going to listen and not pay attention. But that's not the same as understanding, because you can be listening to me but not understand the words I use. So understanding is different. And then there is speaking. So do you remember our iceberg? So there's a lot of understanding under the water before the bit on the top, which is speaking. So all of that is communication and language. And this, we should really be the focus for all the children. And for the younger children, younger than age 2, we really focus on this. As they get older, 2, 3 and 4 years old, we add these specific areas. That doesn't mean that we do nothing with the younger children. This could also exist for the younger children. But there is more focus on the first 3 and then more focus on all 7 for the older children. So literacy is reading and also writing. But our children don't learn to write a lot. You know, we're not at primary school. So, and reading, all of these things, it's a progress. So the first step of reading is being interested in looking at a book. It's not actually reading words. It's just looking at the pictures and understanding that books have meaning. That's the first step. And then later we might learn to recognize some letters, maybe the first letter of our name, and then they'll learn to read and recognize their name. And then there'll be words as well. So even just understanding that words have meaning, that letters are useful, words are useful and mean something. That's the first stages of reading. And then writing, well, the first step of writing might be mark making. So maybe just, it's not really writing, but it's just, if I have a chalk or if I have a pen and I do this, it makes a mark. The first step is understanding. I do this and there's a mark. And then later, we might learn how to do a letter or write our name for the older children. So all of these things progress. And then we have mathematics, which is numbers. So we might just learn to count, which is a little bit like a song almost, even without singing. We just know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't, we can do it in a song, but even without a song, it's just a pattern, da, 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 you know? And then later we learn that it means something. And then even later we can do maybe 2 + 3 is 5. And then also mathematics is the concept of shape and space and measurement. So bigger and smaller, we would say, is a mathematical idea. And then does something need a lot of space or not much space? Is something heavier than something else? What you might notice at the nursery is we do not use much plastic. We try not to have too much. In fact, we try to have no plastic toys, because plastic isn't very heavy. But if something is made of wood, for example, especially the Montessori equipment, we learn that bigger is heavy and smaller is light. So that's part of mathematics and science. And you get it better with real materials than with plastic. A plastic cube this size and small, you can't really notice the difference in your hands. But natural materials you can notice heavy and light. And then we want children to understand the world. So they learn about people, they learn about the world and technology. We'll look at this a bit later as well. And then the last one is expressive art and design. So exploring and using media and materials. So media and materials could be paint, or coloured pieces of paper, or glue, or cotton wool, and what is sand, and what is Play-Doh. Do you know what Play-Doh is? I think it's on this. Let's have a look on our vocab list. Yeah. That's the one.
Oh yeah.
How do you say it?
橡皮泥.
Yeah.
Play-Doh.
Play-Doh, something.
To make the shape they want.
So we would call that media. It's all material.
Okay.
Probably material. So it's all of that comes in expressive art and design. And the last subsection is being imaginative. So here, what do you do with the Play-Doh? What do you do with the Lego? Like, children can use their imagination. So that's part of being creative. So this is all part of expressive art and design. So these are our 7 areas and the sub-areas. And this is really, really important for planning. And when we talked about the planning and assessment, we plan and assess according to these 7 areas and the sub-areas. The reports are divided into the 7 areas and sub-areas. So the key children will do reports every term, so every 4 months, and we see, is the child progressing or not? We want to see improvement in all 7 areas. It's not going to be even. It's going to be, that's quicker than this, and then if there's another child, this is quicker than that. That's okay, but always getting better.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't get better, then we're worried and we must do something. We must take extra action to improve. So maybe the child has a special educational need. Maybe the child is just not interested. That's also possible. We gave the example of numbers and counting. But the child needs to learn how to count before going to primary school. So we must come up with a plan. How will we help the child find numbers interesting or something else interesting? If a child is very shy, maybe there's no problem, but the child is shy. But we would like the child to learn to be confident so that he or she can learn how to do things. That's an important, so how can we support the child? So here are the 7 areas and the sub areas. And I think next time we meet, we're going to be focusing on these 7 areas. I think I've said it before, but just in case I haven't said it, we know the unique child, and we've said that we look at the energy of a child, supporting the child's needs in enabling environments. Now that we're thinking of these 7 areas as well, all of that comes together. So if a child is not interested in an activity now, or doesn't have the right energy for an activity now, then we don't force them to do an activity, because the child will not learn. If the child is bored or frustrated, the child doesn't learn the content of the activity then. So that's why we have different activities at the same time in the classroom, that maybe a child is feeling more creative and wants to use the paint, or maybe they're tired and they want to look at a book, or maybe they're fascinated by the book. So we don't force the children to do an activity. We sort of, in the planning and in the assessment, we also think right now, is the child interested or not? Because if the child's not interested, they're not learning. And so we think of both the child's the unique child and the child needs, and then the supportive environment like that. And then we're thinking of these 7 areas. So it would be easy as a Chinese teacher to just do communication and language, to just think we're going to do songs and vocabulary. But that would be a shame, because you can learn vocabulary doing physical activity, and you can be looking at books, and you can be counting, and you could be understanding the world. So instead of just thinking communication language, we can also teach much more. So we want to see the 7 areas, and all of the different sub-areas. Even as a Chinese teacher, I think the priority is probably, I must only speak Chinese, one person, one language. Also think of these other areas. So that's why next time we're going to really look at different examples of what it can be, and there's a really big document that shows all of the areas for all of the ages. So what is examples for all of the areas? And it's a really helpful document to help you think about what the children are learning. So all of this is what, and the characteristics of the how. And they overlap a little bit. We'll see. Do we have any questions about the characteristics or the areas of learning? No, okay, great. So we'll be looking at examples, and you'll also do an online training about all of this as well.